The rain hammered against the windshield as Sarah Chen navigated her rental car through the winding roads of rural Pennsylvania. It was October 2019, and the autumn leaves that should have painted the landscape in warm colors appeared gray and lifeless under the oppressive storm clouds. She had been driving for 3 hours from Philadelphia, each mile taking her further from civilization and deeper into a past that most people had forgotten. Sarah was an investigative journalist for the Philadelphia Inquirer, 32 years old, with a reputation for uncovering stories that others were too afraid to touch. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her brown eyes carried the weight of Tolman's sleepless nights spent chasing leads. But the story was different. The story was personal. 6 months earlier, Sarah's grandmother had passed away at the age of 87. While sorting through her belongings, Sarah had discovered a leather journal hidden in a locked box at the bottom of her grandmother's closet. The journal belonged to someone named Elizabeth Garrett, and it detailed horrifying experiences at a place called Riverside Asylum between 1962 and 1963. What made Sarah's blood run cold was the inscription on the first page, written in her grandmother's handwriting. I tried to forget. I tried to move on. But the laughter still haunts me. Elizabeth was my sister, and I failed her. Sarah had never known her grandmother had a sister. Family records showed no trace of Elizabeth Garrett. It was as if she had been erased from existence. The journal entries were fragmented and disturbing. Elizabeth wrote about being committed to Riverside Asylum after a nervous breakdown following the death of her infant son. She described the treatments, experimental therapies, a doctor who promised to cure her but instead subjected her to increasingly cruel procedures. The last entry was dated March 15, 1963, and it simply read, Room 313. He is coming. I can hear him laughing in the hallway. If anyone finds this, please tell my sister Roche that I love her. Tell her I am sorry I called in to be stronger. After this, nothing. Elizabeth Garrett disappeared from all records. Riverside Asylum closed its doors in 1987 amid allegations of patient abuse, but no formal investigation was ever completed. The building had been abandoned for over 30 years. Sarah's sistema de posicionamento global indicated she was only 2 miles from her destination. Through the way, she could see a rusted sign barely hanging onto its post, Riverside Asylum private property no trespassing. She pulled over and checked her equipment, camera, flashlight, backup batteries, pepper spray, and her phone with an external battery pack. She had told her editor, Marcus, where she was going, but she hadn't told him why. This wasn't just a story. This was about finding out what happened to the aunt she never knew she had. The main building of Riverside Asylum emerged from the mist like a tombstone. 5 stories of gray stone and broken windows, with ivy crawling up the walls like grasping fingers. The architecture was late Victorian, all sharp angles and Gothic arches that seemed designed to intimidate rather than heal. Sarah parked her car in what used to be the visitor's lot, now overtaken by weeds pushing through cracked asphalt. The front entrance was chained shut, but Sarah had expected that. She walked around the perimeter until she found the side door where the wood had rotted away. The smell hit her first, a mixture of mold, decay, and something else she called into key to identify. Something organic and wrong. She clicked on her flashlight and stepped inside. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing a long corridor lined with peeling wallpaper and debris. Old wheelchairs sat abandoned, their metal frames rusted and twisted. Grenades lay overturned, their leather restraints still intact and stained with substances Sarah didn't want to think about. The floor was covered in broken glass, fallen ceiling tiles, and scattered papers that had survived decades of neglect. Sarah began documenting everything with her camera, methodically photographing each room as she searched for any sign of room 313. The first floor appeared to be administrative offices and common areas. She found patient files scattered across the floor of what must have been the records room, but water damage had made most of them illegible. Still, she carefully collected several that might be salvageable. As she moved deeper into the building, Sarah noticed something odd. Among all the decay and abandonments, there were signs of recent activity. Fresh footprints in the dust, a relatively new padlock on one of the doors, cigarette butts that called in to be more than a few weeks old. She imagined her alone and being drawn to this place. The stairwell to the second floor was treacherous. Several steps had collapsed, and Sarah had to carefully navigate around the gaps. The higher she climbed, the stronger the unidentifiable smell became. It was making her nauseous, but she pushed forward. The second floor had been the woman's ward. The rooms here were smaller, more cell-like, with heavy doors and small windows reinforced with wire mesh. Sarah's chest tightened as she imagined her and locked in one of these rooms, alone and afraid. She checked each door, looking for room numbers, but most had been removed or were too crowded to read. At the end of the hallway, she found the nurse's station. The desk was still intact, covered in dust and debris. Sarah began searching through the drawers, hoping to find floor plans or room assignments. Instead, she found something else. A personal logbook dated 1962 a 1963, remarkably well preserved inside a metal drawer. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The entries were brief, clinical notes about patient behaviors and medication schedules. She flipped through the pages until she found what she was looking for. Elizabeth Garrett, patient 2847, assigned to room 313, third floor, East Wing. Under Dr. Marcus Holloway SQ. Dr. Marcus Holloway. Sarah pulled out her phone and tried to search for information about him, but there was no signal inside the building. She photographed the relevant pages and continued her search. The third floor was worse. The windows here had been completely boarded up, making it darker and more claustrophobic. Sarah's flashlight beam seemed weaker, barely penetrating the oppressive darkness. The rooms on this floor were different, larger, with equipment that looked more like torture devices than medical instruments. She passed a room filled with old hydrotherapy tabs, another with an electroshock therapy chair still bolted to the floor. Room 303 was at the far end of the East Wing corridor. The door was slightly ajar, and unlike the other rooms, the number was clearly visible, freshly painted in white against the dark wood. Sarah's instincts screamed at her to turn back, but she had come too far. She pushed the door open. The room was approximately 12 feet by 10 feet, with a single barred window that had been boarded over. Unlike the rest of the building, this room was clean, too clean. The floor had been swept, the walls showed signs of recent painting, and in the center of the room sat a metal bed framed with leather restraints, oiled and maintained. On the small table beside the bed was a leather journal, Elizabeth's journal, the original. Sarah's blood turned teeth. This was the journal she had found in her grandmother's belongings. Or rather, a copy of it. Someone had been here. Someone had reconstructed this room. She heard it then, a sound that made her soul recoil. Laughter. Loud, masculine, echoing from somewhere deeper in the building. Not the laughter of joy, but something twisted and cruel. The same laughter Elizabeth had written about in her final entry. Sarah grabbed the journal and turned to leave, but the door slammed shut. She rushed to it, pulling with all her strength, but it wouldn't budge. The laughter grew louder, closer. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Who is there? Sarah called out, her voice steadier than she felt. She pulled out her pepper spray, holding it in front of her. I am a journalist. People know I am here. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. Then, a voice, raspy fromage but still commanding. No, they don't. You didn't tell your editor the real reason you came here. You told him you were investigating urban decay. You came alone because you wanted to find her yourself. The door opened slowly. In the beam of her flashlight stood a man in his late 70s, wearing a surprisingly clean and pressed suit. His white hair was neatly combed, his face weathered but sharp. In his hand, he held a small digital recorder. Sarah Chen, he said, smiling. I've been waiting for you. Well, not you specifically. I've been waiting for someone from the Garrett family to finally come looking for Elizabeth. It has been 56 years. Who are you? Sarah demanded, keeping the pepper spray pointed at him. Dr. Marcus Holloway, he said, his smile widening. Though I suppose I should say former doctor. Holloway. I lost my medical license in 1987 when they closed this place. Unfortunate business, really. I was doing important work. Sarah's mind raced. This man had to be in his late 70s at least, which meant he would have been in his early 20s when Elizabeth was here. You treated my aunt. Treated. He laughed again. That horrible sound. Is that what you think happened here? Oh, Sarah. You read the journal. You know better than that. He stepped into the room, and Sarah backed away until she hit the wall. Holloway didn't seem threatening, just eerily calm. He set the recorder on the table and pressed play. A woman's voice filled the room, terrified and pleading. Please, doctor. Holloway, ele do barulho. Ele take the medication. Please don't put me back in the chair. Please. I'm begging you. That is your aunt. Holloway said softly. Recorded March 14, 1963. The day before her last journal entry. What did you do to her? Sarah's voice broke. Holloway walked to the window and looked at the boards covering it. In the 1960s, psychiatric medicine was experimental. We had permission from the families, you understand. Legal permission to try new treatments, to push boundaries. Elizabeth came to us broken, suicidal after losing her child. Her husband and your grandmother signed the papers. They wanted her fixed. The does not give you the right to torture her. Torture? Holloway turned to face her, his expression darkening. I was trying to help her. The electroshock therapy, the hydrotherapy, the medication trials, they were all approved procedures. But Elizabeth was resistant. She fought every treatment. She would scream, cry, try to hurt herself. We had to restrain her for her own safety. Where is she? Sarah demanded. What happened to her? Holloway asked, his smile returning. But now it looked sad, almost regretful. That is the question, isn't it? What happened to Elizabeth Garrett? The official record says she was transferred to another facility. But there is no other facility. There never was. Sarah felt sick. You killed her. No, Holloway said firmly. I saved her. You see, Sarah, your aunt wasn't just depressed. She was brilliant. Before her breakdown, she was a research chemist. Did you know that? Of course you didn't. That was erased too. Elizabeth understood things about the human brain that I was only beginning to grasp. We started talking, really talking, during her treatments. She proposed a theory about neural plasticity that was decades ahead of its time. He picked up the journal from that table. She wrote this journal as documentation, but not of abuse, of collaboration. The procedures she described waiting to being done to her against her will. She was helping develop them, testing them on herself. The laughter you keep reading about, that was mean, yes. I would laugh because her theories kept proving correct. We were on the verge of something revolutionary. Sarah shook her head. You were insane. She was your patient. She was vulnerable, grieving. She was a scientist. Holloway shouted, his composure finally cracking. She wanted to push forward, to make her son's death mean something. But your grandmother, Rose, she started asking questions. She came here demanding to see Elizabeth. We had to shut down the research. The hospital administrator got nervous, threatened to report our work as unethical. So what did you do? Holloway was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. I gave Elizabeth a choice. Continue the research in secret or be discharged back to her life, back to the grief that was destroying her. She chose to continue, but she couldn't exist in both worlds. So we faked her transfer, destroyed her records, and she became someone else. Sarah's head was spinning. You were saying she is alive. I am saying that Elizabeth Garrett died on March 15, 1963, but the woman she became lived on. She took a new name, a new identity. She continued our research in private, away from the restrictions of ethics boards and fearful administrators. For decades, she worked on treatments for severe psychiatric conditions that actually help people. Not the barbaric methods they accused us of here, but real, effective interventions based on the foundations we built together. He pulled out his phone, a jarring sight in this decrepit room, and showed Sarah a photograph. It was recent, showing an elderly woman in the modern laboratory, smiling at the camera. Sarah's breath caught. The woman had the same eyes as her grandmother, the same shape of face. That is impossible, Sarah whispered. She wanted me to show you this if anyone ever came looking, Holloway said. She has been following your career, Sarah. She is proud of you. The investigative work you do, uncovering uncomfortable truths, it has that same spirit she had. But she needs you to understand something. The truth you were looking for is not the truth you think it is. Then let me talk to her. If she has to leave, if the story is true, let me verify it. Holloway shook his head. She can't. Her work is too important, too controversial. If her true identity was revealed, decades of research would be questioned, discredited. Hundreds of patients who were helped by her methods would suddenly be viewed as victims of the woman who faked her own death. So this is all just another cover-up, Sarah said bitterly. No, a new voice said from the doorway. A woman's voice, elderly but strong. This is me giving you the choice I was given. Sarah spun around. The woman from the photograph stood there, leaning on a cane, wearing a long coat against the chill. In person, the resemblance to her grandmother was unmistakable. This was Elizabeth Garrett. I am sorry for the theatrics, Elizabeth said, moving slowly into the room. Marcus always had a flair for the dramatic, but we needed to make sure you were serious, that you wouldn't give up when things got strange. We needed to know if you were ready for the truth. And Elizabeth. Sarah's voice was barely audible. I haven't been called in a very long time, Elizabeth said, her eyes glistening. But yes, I was your grandmother's sister. I was Elizabeth Garrett, and I did die here, in a way. The woman I was, broken and drowning in grief, she called in to survive, so I let her go. Grandmother looked for you her whole life, Sarah said, anger mixing with confusion. She blamed herself for your disappearance. She died thinking she failed you. Elizabeth's face crumpled with pain. I know. That is my greatest regret. But Ross would have tried to bring me back, to save me from what she would have seen as a terrible mistake. She wouldn't have understood that he didn't need saving. I needed purpose. Marcus gave me that. By experimenting on you, by subjecting you to electroshock therapy, by treating me as a colleague, Elizabeth corrected. Yes, I underwent the treatments, but with full knowledge and consent. The journal you found was written to document my experiences as a patient participant in research that would have been shut down if presented formally. We were ahead of our team, and society punishes those who move too fast. Marcus stepped forward. Miss Chen, your aunt has spent the last 5 decades developing treatments for treatment-resistant depression, PTSD, and severe anxiety disorders. Her work, published under her new identity, has helped thousands of people. But it is all built on research that began here, in this room, with methods that would be considered unethical by today's standards. What are you asking me to do? Sarah asked. Elizabeth moved closer, her eyes searching Sarah's face. I am asking you to make the same choice I made. To see what matters more. The comfortable truth that everyone expects, or the complicated reality that actually exists. You could write the story you came here to write. Missing woman, corrupt doctor, covered up patient abuse. It would be a good story. It would probably win you awards. Or, Sarah prompted. Or you could write nothing, Elizabeth said quietly. You could walk away, knowing that sometimes the people we think were victims were actually warriors fighting battles we couldn't understand. You could let me finish my work in peace, knowing that when I die, the full truth will be documented and released. Not now, when it could destroy everything EV built, but later, when it can be properly contextualized. Sarah looked around the room, at the carefully maintained space that was part memorial, part confession booth. She thought about her grandmother, who had carried the weight of her sister's disappearance for over 50 years. She thought about the journal, written in deliberately ambiguous terms that could be read as either a cry for help or a scientific log. She thought about the truth, and how sometimes the truth isn't as simple or satisfying. Show me, Sarah said finally. Show me the research. Show me the patients you really helped. If you want me to walk away from this story, I need to know that it is worth it. Elizabeth smiled, and for a moment Sarah could see the brilliant scientist she must have been before grief nearly destroyed her. Come with us. You will spend the next week at my facility. You will interview patients, review caso files, see the work firsthand, and then you will decide. And if I decide to publish, Marcus and Elizabeth exchanged a look. Then we'll accept it, Elizabeth said. We were old, Sarah. We won't be here much longer. Maybe it asked time for the truth to come out, whatever the consequences. But we wanted to give you all the information first. The real story, not just the horror story. Sarah nodded slowly. She didn't trust them. Not completely, but she was a journalist. The real story was always more complex than the simple narrative. And if there was even a chance that Elizabeth was telling the truth, that her work had genuinely helped people, then Sarah owed it to her grandmother's memory to find out. 1 week, Sarah agreed, but I am keeping the journal and I am documenting everything. If I find any evidence that you were lying, that patients were hurt, the story goes public immediately. Fair enough, Elizabeth said. She extended her hand, whether marked with a spot, but steady. Sarah took it, feeling the strength still there. As they walked out of room 313, Sarah looked back one last time. The room that had held so much pain, so much mystery, was not just an empty space in an abandoned building. The laughter that had echoed through these halls for decades was finally explained, and somehow that made it more unsettling, not less. The truth, Sarah was learning, was rarely as simple as we wanted it to be. Victims could be collaborators, villains could be visionaries, and sometimes, the people we thought were lost were actually hiding in plain sight, doing the work they believed in, even if the world wasn't ready to accept it. 3 months later, Sarah sat in her apartment in Philadelphia, staring at the documents on her laptop. One was the exposé she had originally planned to write, The Dark Secret of Riverside Asylum, how a respected doctor tortured vulnerable patients. It was well-researched, compelling, and completely publishable. The other was a draft of something different, something she had never written before. It wasn't an article. It was a letter to her editor, Marcus, explaining that after investigating Riverside Asylum, she had found that the story was far more complicated than initial evidence suggested. That the primary subject of concern, a patient who had disappeared in 1963, had actually voluntarily left the facility and gone on to live a productive life under a different identity. That while the asylum had certainly engaged in practices that would be considered unethical today, the specific cause she had been investigating did not warrant exposure at this time. The letter was a lead by omission, but Sarah had spent a week at Elizabeth's research facility. She had interviewed patients whose lives had been transformed by treatments developed from the early, controversial work. She had seen the meticulous ethical standards Elizabeth now applied to her research, and she had read the full documentation that Elizabeth promised would be released upon her death, laying out the complete truth about what had happened at Riverside Asylum. Sarah had also learned something about her grandmother. Elizabeth had shown her letters, kept secret for decades, that Rosa had written but never sent. Letters that revealed Rosa knew more than she had ever admitted, that she had suspected Elizabeth had chosen to disappear, and that she had spent her life torn between exposing the truth and protecting her sister as a choice. In the end, Rosa had chosen silence, and now Sarah was being asked to do the same. She looked at the photograph Elizabeth had given her before they parted ways. It showed two young women, Rosa and Elizabeth, sitting on the porch swing in 1958, before the loss and grief that would change everything. They looked happy, arms around each other, full of hope for the future. On the back, in Elizabeth's handwriting, was a note. Thank you for finding me, Sarah. Tell Rosa's daughter, your mother, that I loved her sister until the day he died, and I've honored her memory every day since. The truth will come out eventually. But truth without context is just noise. Give me time to provide the context. Love, Aunt Elizabeth. Sarah closed her laptop on l'exposé and opened the letter to her editor. She would send it in the morning. The story of Riverside Asylum would remain buried for now, along with the laughter in room 313, along with the complicated truth about Elizabeth Garrett, who died so that Dr. Eleanor Crane could live and continue her work. Sometimes, Sarah thought, the most important stories were the ones you chose not to tell. At least, not yet. She looked out her apartment window at the Philadelphia skyline, wondering if her grandmother would approve of her choice, wondering if silence could be a form of truth-telling, if protecting someone's legacy was worth suppressing their history. In her pocket, her phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Thank you for understanding. The research continues. When at S-Team, the world will know everything. You have my word. Et embutol. Sarah deleted the message and poured herself a glass of wine. Outside, the October rain had returned, washing the streets clean, hiding the city as secrets beneath rushing water and reflections of streetlights. Somewhere out there, Elizabeth Garrett was still alive, still working, still laughing with satisfaction when her theories proved correct. And in an abandoned asylum in rural Pennsylvania, room 313 sat empty and waiting, holding its secrets for a future generation of truth seekers who might be ready to understand the complicated reality of what had happened there. The laughter had been explained, but the story was far from over. It had simply been postponed, waiting for the right team, the right context, the right understanding. Sarah raised her glass to the photograph of Roz and Elizabeth, two sisters who had both made impossible choices and lived with the consequences. The complicated truth, she whispered into the empty apartment, into the stories we choose to tell, and the ones we choose to keep. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the present, preserving the past, and leaving the future uncertain. The end.